So when I started my discernment to join an order, I didn't know anything about the Capuchin friars. The only thing that I knew is that I was joining a Franciscan group, and I was joining because of Francis' desire to live a simple life and his desire to work and live with the poor. Like Oscar Romero, Francis made a preferential option for the poor, following the example of Christ. And so because of my devotion to Romero, I thought that joining the Franciscans was a good option for me. And I'm grateful that God has brought me here, because as I have learned about our charism through the constitutions and Francis' life, I see so many examples of friars, that saintly friars, those who have died, some of them who are alive that I have seen, that there is a great witness in them that our order indeed has made a preferential option for the poor. It's in there, it's in our constitutions. And so that makes me peaceful and just that conviction. Yeah, this is a good place for me, following that desire and devotion with Monsignor Romero. So for Francis, making that preferential option for the poor and living like the poor, I believe that was the external manifestation of his charism, that it was to live the gospel of Christ without loss. And so it was for Blessed Romero. His charism was also to live the gospel of Christ without loss. So as a result, I believe that Blessed Romero also can help us, can inspire us to live our charism more faithfully and authentically. So I want to share with you, I guess, two themes from the spirituality of Romero that can help us. So the first one is Romero's example and understanding of prayer. So I want to share with you just a little bit of how his life of prayer developed. So as a boy, whenever he had a chance, I read in his biographies that he would go to the church and pray as a little boy, saying many prayers that his grandma taught him. At 13 years old, he went to the seminary, the minor seminary, and there he developed the habit of offering a holy hour every day. And he preferred to do it late at night and in the darkness. He had some thirst for mystic prayer. And because he was very intelligent, the bishop sent him to Rome to finish his studies, theological studies. And there he found the spirituality of Juan de la Cruz, Teresa de Avila, and Ignatian spirituality, which was part of his life. He loved to do silent retreats every year, and he did once the 30-day silent retreat. He had a strong devotion to Mary, and as I read, he would not take any decision as a bishop, write his homilies, without spending time in the Blessed Sacrament. And actually, his room was very close to the Blessed Sacrament, where he lived. So all of Romero's ministry and life was based on a very reflective and silent prayer. And in fact, like one time, it was in his last year of life, when a journalist asked Romero where he found the inspiration for his work and preaching. He said, "Your question is very timely. Just now, I have come from my retreat, and if it were not for this prayer and reflection with which I try to stay united with God, I would be no more than what St. Paul calls clinging metal." Brothers, Romero was convinced, just like Francis, that our happiness And all the good that we can do comes from a strong relationship with God that is developed in prayer. And in fact, in one of his homilies, he explained that prayer leads to the peak of human development, and that human being really exists when they meet God face to face and understand the marvels God has done with them. In other words, he suggested that people do not experience authentic happiness and live virtuous life because they do not take the time to listen to the voice of the Lord, which speaks in our conscience. And so Romero believed that the lack of prayer was one of the reasons for which society experienced a lot of problems, especially in El Salvador during that time. And although Romero exhorted people to be silent in prayer, he also was very clear that prayer was not a passive exercise. He taught that prayer does not mean that we wait for God to do what we can do. Instead, he exhorts the people to work with all their strength and creativity, trusting that God was working with them. And furthermore, he said that the church was called to teach people to pray as they ought to pray, and not as people who have fallen asleep or live in conformity with the things as they are. The church must work twice as hard for human development, he said, and to awaken people to develop their abilities and to bring people to hope in God. In other words, Romero believed that authentic prayer would never leave us to escape from our realities and leave us in a comfortable place, saying a whole bunch of pious prayers, but authentic prayer would energize us to see all of our talents and strength to promote our own dignity, and at the same time would inspire us and energize us to do our part in the establishment of God's kingdom. I feel that Romero challenges us to examine our prayer life. Is our prayer energizing us to renew our life and inspire us to use our talents and creativity for the good of God's people, and especially the poor, whom our charism call us to serve and identify with them? Or is our prayer simply leaving us here in our seats, just feeling very good about ourselves and just satisfied with saying beautiful words maybe, or just receiving a lot of insights in prayer, just making a lot of reflection? And the second element that I want to share with you is that can help us to live more our charism is that Romero's conviction that in order to live an authentic gospel life, he had to have tangible solidarity with the poor. For him, this solidarity could not be just mere beautiful or idealistic thoughts. It wasn't non-negotiable for him. He had to make concrete steps, and it was not easy for him to make those steps. And the concrete solidarity meant that he had to courageously live an austere way of life, and also to assume an attitude of minority. In his fourth pastoral letter, which is entitled "The Church Mission Amid the National Crisis," Romero bluntly stated that the church would betray its own love for God and its fidelity to the gospel if it stopped being the voice of the voiceless. And this demands, he said, of the church a greater presence among the poor. It ought to be in solidarity with them, running the risk they run, enduring the persecution that is their fate, ready to give the greatest possible testimony of its love by defending and promoting those who were first in Jesus' love. As I said, that making that step, what I read is Romero wrote it like a year before he died, but it took a long process to come to that point. Early in his life, he started giving alms. He was very charitable with people, just like Francis. Like Francis did that. Then when he was sent to Rome, as I said, to study theology, there is a writing of him in a newspaper from the seminary in which he said that diocesan priests had to make a vow of poverty, although they have not made that vow. But they had to do that out of pastoral charity, he wrote. And he lived that vow of poverty. When he was a pastor in San Miguel, where I am from, in that city, he slept in his room, not on a regular bed, but on a cot. And one time that he was in a mission trip, he had many friends who were very rich, and a group of women came to his room and furnished his room. And when he came back, he was very angry, and he just gave away everything to the poor. He didn't want to have much in his room. He really lived a very simple life. And he did a lot to help to fulfill basic necessities for the poor. He gave them food, but he worried about the whole person. He created he created a group for AA meetings. He opened his house to do that. He teach people how to read, teach about nutrition and hygiene. He did a lot of stuff. But his strong advocacy to defend the poor of the right, it only came later in his life when he was 57 years old. He had been appointed bishop of a small diocese, and there 6 catechists, campesinos, were killed by the National Army. Many priests from the diocese asked Romero to publicly denounce that. And Romero preferred to send a letter to the president to clarify the situation. The priests were not happy with Romero, but he was not yet there to make that movement. It was during that time, though, that he started immersing himself into the documents of Medellin that called the church to make the preferential option for the poor. But the definite event that moved him to make that movement, that step, it was when a close friend of him died, actually was murdered. His name was Rutilio Grande, a Jesuit who is also in the process of canonization right now. But Grande was killed because he was denouncing a lot of the injustices in the country as well. And so when Romero heard what happened to Grande, he just went to the place, and when he got there, he found out the community of Grandes praying for him. He saw the dead body, and it was there at his 60 years old that Romero realized that God was calling him to make a deeper commitment to the gospel, just as his friend Rutilio had done so. He accepted God's calling with a lot of fear. He says that later in his diaries, that he was very fearful about doing what he was doing. But he had the conviction that God would supply him with necessary graces for the mission. You have read a lot of his quotes. He's a lot of passion, a lot of desire to defend the rights of the poor, but it was not easy for him. And unfortunately, those in power, they silent his voice. But Romero's voice, has not been really silent. His voice It's just very strong in El Salvador. So many people, especially the poor, they want to convey that to many people, and even outside of the country. Romero, I think, is more well known outside of the country than in El Salvador, unfortunately. But his voice has not been silent. Brothers, I think that we are also called to be like Romero, to be signs of hope, because that is what Romero is in El Salvador. It's a sign of hope, and that conviction that people, they just believe that with Romero, God walked in the country. God was just giving them hope. And we also are called to do that. There is a lot of hope, there is need of a lot of hope in our society. We are to be that, we are to share God's love and companionship in our society with those being oppressed by the culture of death right now. It's many forms that it's in our society. But especially I think that we are called to be closer to the materially poor because our Franciscan vocation calls us to do that. And Francis showed us with his life, our Constitution tells us that in chapter 1 that our Constitution said that we are to gladly live among those who are poor, weak and infirm, sharing in their lives. And against our Constitution more bluntly says that we will be genuinely proclaim to the poor that God is with them to the degree that we are able, that we are available to them, and truly share in their condition. Share in their condition. Thanks God, most of our fraternities are located in poor areas. We are among the poor, and many of the friars work for and with the poor. But if we are sincere with us, we have to accept that not many of us truly share in the life of the poor. We live and work among the poor, but when we enter many of our houses, we find an abundance of material goods, have many personal things, and frequently make expenses that we don't truly need for our security, happiness, and even for our ministry sometimes. Now, some friars will probably tell me, do not judge us. Your needs are not my needs. And I agree, I respect those needs. But we need to accept that many of us have fabricated a lot of needs influenced by consumerism, convincing ourselves that if we do not fulfill an X need, we will not be happy, and that we will not be able to do the ministry that we do. But that's just a lie. We are just convincing ourselves of that. We have to confront ourselves and get rid of the consumerism tendencies in us. You know, in different times I have asked myself if I would not have all the benefits and commodities that I have as a friar, would I still choose to be a friar? And to tell you the truth, the first time that I asked that question myself, I was very hesitant to say yes. I was just some fear in me. And I think that reflects how strongly I am attached to comfort and to the material goods. And if this is the case, then God is not the center of my life, and I have to be sincere with that. So what about you? Would you still choose to be a friar if you would not have the material facilities that you have as a friar? If we truly want to be faithful to our charism, and above all manifest the primacy of God in our life, we have to live an austere life, accompanied with an attitude of minority, as our Constitution said very clearly. But that austere life, it has to be manifest. And our Constitution said that austerity has to be manifest by making choices